Ready to go?
Right.
I'll begin. Right, let me show you the book first of all. So this is a copy of Breakfast at Tiffany's. This is from the Folio Society, so it's a nice copy of nice paper with nice illustrations and so on. It's actually a kind of a big folded sheet of paper basically, so it's uncut. But that actually makes it easier when we're sewing it. When I get the book, the first thing I need to do is decide what the design is going to be. So first thing is to read it, which I've done, and then the second thing is to try to take some inspiration from either what you've read or from the illustrations. Basically what I've decided to do is to take those colours and use those colours as kind of the inspiration for the colouring on the binding itself. So in terms of the design, what I came up with, in fact it was something that Imelda said, which was Holly Golightly in the story. She's a bit like the light, and the people around her, like the moths circling the light, who can't quite get to her necessarily, but all sort of circle around her. So that was actually the inspiration for the design that I've come up with. The first thing I always do is just sketch loads of different pencil sketches and scribbles and things, and I went through loads of options and thoughts on that. But what I've finally come up with is basically that. The centre point, it won't actually be a circle, it'd be a bright yellow sort of central spot, and then it'll gradually fade out to brown, representing the brownstone buildings that the scene is set in. And then you've got these ellipses sort of circling around this central bright spot, representing the other characters. And then, as you can see, what I've done is use the colours to fill that in. So that's the basic principle of the design. Now it's important to get that right first, because it goes right back to the very beginning of what I'm about to do, which is to start sewing the book. And when you sew the book, you have to sew in the end papers. So these are the end papers that I produced yesterday, which sort of lead through from dark brown to a light brown to the sort of creamy white of the book itself. So that's it. That's now basically ready to sew. So the first thing I need to do is put some holes in the fold so I know where it's going to be sewn. This particular little jig that I make, it's a cracking little tool. All will become clear, because you're probably thinking, what on earth is he talking about? The holes are going to go on these marks. I've now got to punch a hole in all of these, and this ensures that the holes are in exactly the right position and they go exactly through the centre of the fold. It's funny because the sewing stage of it, which is the next step, is one of the bits I like more than anything actually. It's I find it really quite absorbing and relaxing. You'll notice throughout this that it aids concentration significantly if you stick the tongue out the corner of your mouth. So I now just need to punch the holes in the waste sheets.
Are they waste sheets just to protect?
Sorry, I say waste sheets, I meant the end papers. These are the end papers. I say waste sheets because there's a waste sheet on the end which it protects the book when it's been sewn, but that will actually be torn out later on. Okay, now I need to make sure these are all in the right order, and basically we've got these black marks that are on the spine of these books. They're actually called the signatures, which is where the name signature bindings. But they're all in order. You can see they sort of form that line, so that I know that everything there is correct. So we can now get around to sewing. Now to sew, I am using this device, which is a sewing frame, and this basically simply is a device to hold the tapes in position while you sew around them, and the tape is here to it holds the pages together a bit with the sewing, but this is also what attaches the book block to the boards, so it's a very important part of the book structure. I've got my 4 tapes in position, which I'm going to be sewing around. I've lined them up with the holes on the spine of the book, and now I'm going to sew. So those over there. This is waxed linen thread that I'm using. So the first bit's straightforward enough, it's just in and out and going around the, don't tread on the thread, and going around these tapes. I've got an engraving somewhere from the 1500s, and it's got a picture of a guy doing just this. It's exactly the same. There's no difference at all apart from the fact he's using cords. Admittedly, he doesn't use braces fittings in order to hold them together, but the forwarding of the book, as it's called, which is this preliminary stage before you get to the decoration side of it, is as important as the actual binding itself. Bit of trivia for you: the stitches at the end, the top and the bottom end, are called the kettle stitches. No idea why. I knew you couldn't ask me. I have no idea why they're called kettle stitches. Somebody will be able to tell us, I'm sure. Okay, that's that one done. Just finish off with a double kettle stitch, and it all secure. There we go. That's it sewn. Trim those off. Undo my braces. I just check through it just to make sure everything's the right way up. It appears to be in order. Yeah, done. There we go. So I'm just going to glue up the spine a little bit, just to hold all the sections in place whilst I trim them. You use two primary kinds of glue in bookbinding. There's PVA, which is a sort of surface glue really. The other kind of glue is paste, basically something like effectively a flour paste, and indeed you use mixtures of the two as well. I'm not putting too much on here because I don't want it to be absolutely solid, just enough to hold the sections in position. There we go, so we'll just leave that 10 minutes, go and have a cup of coffee or something, and when we come back we'll be able to trim the edges and make it nice and square and flat and ready for moving on. That needs to be absolutely solid, you see, to be able to go through it okay. So this process is called ploughing, and it's the traditional way of cutting a book. Designer bookbinders tend to do this rather than use a guillotine. This gives a very smooth, very accurate cut. So we do it, it sort of does it a few pages at a time. I'm just going to get rid of a bit of that. I can feel that the blade is sharp, which is good. Right, so the first thing I need to do now is, having marked that up, is to round the spine, which is just creating an initial kind of shape to it really. I'll check the shape as I'm going. got a little bit of round, which should be sufficient for what I need. Now I can put it onto the backing boards, which have just got a little bit of double-sided tape to hold it in position. This needs to be quite accurate to ensure that the shoulders are even, otherwise the book won't be square, and that can go in the press. What I'm going to do now is back the book. I've already rounded it, which has given it the sort of gentle rounded shape on the spine, and I have to create the shoulders on it. We just do that with a hammer, so I'm just going to basically whack away at this quite gently to start off with. Start off using this edge of the hammer, and you have to be quite careful with this, because if you damage the paper, I've done it before, it can wrinkle the pages a bit, particularly at this stage. So just a bit of a gentle shaping to start off with, and then glancing blows, just kind of forcing the edges over this metal strip. For a nicely rounded shape with the shoulders nicely formed. It takes a little while to do it. It's worth spending a bit of time. That's fine. So I just cut this cloth to size. It's a very thin, very strong cloth called fray knot. And that just helps hold it in shape and in place when I take it out of the press once it's dried. And there we are, done. Ready for the next stage. You might remember that this is the idea that I had for the design. The first thing I tried was this. The colours, the infills don't go right up to the line. It's not clear even that there are ellipses there. And also areas where it's not exactly following a smooth curve, you can really see it. So having done that, I started to do a similar kind of thing where the infill colours are going to go right up to the lines. So I'm actually going to tool the lines, in other words use a brass heated tool, and then I'm going to cut some very, very thin slithers of black leather which will lay inside that line, that depression that's made by the tool, so it'll be much more delicate. The difficulty will still be getting it absolutely smooth on the curve. I want to use almost as few colours as possible. This is another copy of the book that I was playing about with originally, and you can see the illustrations in there. I'm trying to lift some of those colours to use on the ellipses on the front cover, so that there's a connection between the illustrations and the cover. So that's what I'm aiming for. So there's a lot of work still to do on that, but I've got quite a bit of time, and I can be playing about with that whilst I'm finishing off the actual what's called the forwarding, the beginning part of the process of binding the book. So that's the first thing really. We've cut it smooth, but we just need to now sand it down as smooth as possible. Background on. That's all it takes to start off with, and that can just dry for a moment or two. So what I'm going to do now is sprinkle on some darker ink. Sprinkling is a technique that's been used for centuries in bookbinding, particularly with leather. It stops the colour being so flat and just gives it a bit of lift, you know. There we go. That's all that needs. Now the next step is I want to put some gold, some sprinkled gold leaf onto this, but it needs to be able to stick to it. So we use something called glare, and all I'm going to do is just sprinkle that. So it's real gold leaf, very, very thin gold. There we go. So just very gently, first of all, press it down through a thin piece of paper. Now when I take this off, a lot of the gold will come off with it. So I'm just going to apply a little wax. So as part of the process of applying the wax, which I'll do quite gently, half of that will come off. And this is where the gold that's left really starts to stick. Now, it's the edge cooling done. The next stage then is to sew the end band. For design bindings you sew them in the traditional way, so I'm going to be sewing them using 100% silk thread. The trick with doing end bands is getting the tension right. Put this core in position. And this is the bit where you probably speed up the film today because this now takes about 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe. And I'm going to change colours now, so that one comes over and I'm going to pick up the darker colour.
So how many colours have you got in there altogether?
Three, there's only three colours, yeah. May contain violence. Moments of mild peril. And unfortunately we've got to let that dry, which only gives us time to have a cup of coffee. What a shame. So the next step is lining the spine, but I'm just going to cut pieces to fit in between the tapes, just to sort of infill these, and also on the ends as well. It's really important to get that spine flat. At some point you'll hear footsteps on the roof and the squirrels are about. Sound like they've got hobnail boots on. Right then, so I'm now going to do one more along the top. Need that to dry for a bit. So we've lined the spine and we now need to mark up where the boards are going to go. So what I'm going to do is create some holes to lace these tapes through. I'm just going to mark with a pencil either side of the tapes. And I need to create the holes. So very delicate operation. Involving a big bit of wood, a chisel and a hammer. I knew my woodwork O-level would come in for something. And what I'm going to do is, where the tapes go, I'm going to remove a few laminations of card. Just cutting down a little way. So I'm just going to lift up a little bit of the card. Yeah, feels about right. They'll nestle nicely in those little holes. On the other side though, we need to do the same again. It's a very, very strong method of joining boards on.
It is lovely watching somebody work there.
Just think about this, I don't feel like work. It never has done. We're doing it, what, 6 or 7 years now. What I'm going to do is secure these bits first by just putting some glue. A little weight on it, just to hold it flat. that dry for a bit. Right, so we've just got to recess these into the grooves we made earlier. I'm just going to then be glued in. It's a bit noisy. Make sure it's as flat as possible and the glue spread evenly. And then leave that for a few minutes to dry. And we can turn over and do the same on the other side. So before we put the next layer on here, I just need to sand it down, because although we've filled in between these bumps, we've there's still bumps there, so I just need to reduce that a little bit. You wouldn't think bookbinding would build your muscles, but I tell you, work like this, you really feel it in your arms. Right. So now I need to make the hollow. I like to just give it a bit of help in forming its shape just by curving it a bit. And it's just a question of concertining the paper on top until you're happy with it. It's quite thin craft paper as well. It's a nice smooth surface for the span, because when the leather goes on, any lumps and bumps you'll really see in it, yeah. That's one spine that's the hollow put on and ready for the leather effectively. I've just obviously trimmed at the ends and so on, which we'll do later on, but that's one of the key components of it. So where we're at is that we've got the book has got its boards on, we've got the edge colouring, the end bands have been done, the hollow is on. So that's probably as far as we can get. Yeah, because it all really needs to dry now before I get sanding the edges of the boards. So this is the leather that's going to go onto the book. As you can see, I've air sprayed the background, so it's yellow in the middle and sort of gradually going out to this brown at the edges. I've produced various pieces of thin leather. Again, these have all been airbrushed, sprayed with acrylic ink to give these colours. So what this is going to be is called back paired onlays, which means that essentially gets stuck onto the leather, but then later I'll turn it over and I'll sand it or pare it down so that essentially there's no lump. It feels as flat as it can be, basically. The other element then are these black lines. This is also leather. Essentially what I do there is use a hot tool to create a line and then lay into that a piece of very thin leather. We end up just with very thin strips like this, which basically then will go into the grooves. And this is what we've got left to do today. You can see I've done most of this. The onlays have gone on, the coloured onlays. Most of these have been positioned, and so what I just have to do is take this very thin piece of leather, and this is just going to go round into this line just here. Right, so I just need to paste up this piece of leather. This is a bit fiddly, and it takes a little while. The good thing about paste is it takes a while to dry, so you've got time to manipulate the leather. So just put it in kind of roughly first. As I say, I've already made the groove with a simple hot tool. Trying to do it without stretching it as well, because I don't want it shrinking back or distorting it. Securing it and getting it in the right position so it looks like a continuous curve with no lumps and bumps. Because it's still a little bit of a bump, it's still proud of the surface a little bit. What I'm going to do is press it, because I want the bump to appear on the back, on the back of it, on the reverse side, so I can remove it. So this has to be absolutely flat. So the way I do that is to press it. I'm going to use a piece of blotter. Because there might still be a little bit of glue on it, I'm going to put some of this down, which is basically non-sticky stuff. So that's the good side is on a very flat surface now. The reason I've used a bit of blotting paper rather than straight onto this Formica is if I didn't do that, the shininess of the Formica potentially could transfer to the leather, and I don't really want that. I want to retain a little bit of the grain. I put a piece of foam on it, and another board on the top. Now when I press that, the good side is going to be against the very flat surface. Yeah. The top side is going to be in the foam, so the foam will allow the bumps to come through onto the reverse side. So I'll just give it a quick press in here. There we go. I'll just leave it for a few seconds. So the first thing to do is just check that it's all flat. Yeah. So the design there is now finished. All the lines that I want are on there. When this is on the book, I will actually cut out a circle out of there, and I'll put in another piece of thinner leather, so it'll be slightly recessed. But I'm going to cover that with gold leaf, so it's like a shiny sun, if you like. Right, so that's basically finished. But what I'll do is I will pare this down with my paring knife to remove any lumps and bumps on the back. It's still got tissue on the back here as well, so I might leave a bit of it on in the middle. No point kind of risking it. It's just around the turn-ins, around the joints on the spine. Those are the key areas where it needs to be very flexible, and we'll kind of see how it goes from there. From the book as it is now, the leather is completed essentially. When it goes onto the book, it obviously turns in. What you're left with is obviously a bump with a sort of hole in the middle. In order to make this nice, we have to flatten that. So as an illustration of that, what I'm trying to do is create an inside of a board similar to this. That's the plan. Get my leather on, turned in, filled, the doubleurs on, cut the sun out, and essentially that'll be finished.
Why are they called doubleurs?
That's a very interesting question, Graham. I'm really glad you asked that. Do you have any other questions? I have absolutely no idea why they're called doubleurs. That could be your homework for this evening.
I was going to say that could be your homework for next time. Come back with an answer.
Okay. I think that's probably as far as we can take it, to be honest.
Okay.
Okay, right. Well, we've moved on a bit since last time, and we have a finished book in its box. So here we are, breakfast at Tiffany's, the end result. Open it up so you can see the whole binding. There you can see all the different ellipse shapes that we've got on there, with the different colours in there, and the black onlaid leather lines as well, and then that central circle, which I'll come back to in a moment. So the leather basically was back pared, which means it was sort of sanded and spoke shaved on the back so that it became very flat after the onlays had gone on, and then applied to the book. This doublure actually then went right into the joint. Often these joints are separate, but in this case it was actually formed part of the doublure, so this leather went all the way
and onto the joint and just onto the first page. Once that was on, I've tooled here little cat paw prints. There is an impression of the, only a light impression, but an impression of the cat prints on there as well. If you don't know the story, there is a cat which forms a reasonably integral part to the story in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And then just really for decoration, this is a real gold leaf which is applied on top of that in a sort of random kind of way. And then this is goat suede, which was effectively just glued onto that page, which hides the end of the leather. It's only thin, so it doesn't add a lot of bulk to it. But I really like putting suede on the end paper. It just gives it a bit of, I don't know,
Tactile.
yeah, tactile and a bit of luxuriance to it. It's just really nice. We made the box for it as well. Let me just show you the box. Boxes are important parts of this, although in competition they don't often form part of the competitive process. For a buyer, you know, they're an important part of what they're buying. So these are made specifically to fit each book, and so they have to be millimetre perfect. It's lined with suede. I've chosen a black book cloth with a sort of brown edge, again mimicking the colours that are included on the design really. And as I say, on this one, unusually for me, I don't normally do this, but I particularly liked this image from the book, which I've basically just cut out and stuck onto the cover and then added a title to it, because I think it says an awful lot about her and about the situation, and it kind of sets the scene a little bit. Now, this central bit posed a bit of a problem. My idea was to have in there a solid gold piece made with leather covered in gold leaf, because it was Holly Golightly. If that's representing her, then she sort of shines out, and which is why everybody's attracted to her. Now, I tried that, but for some reason it just didn't work. It was actually quite flat. It didn't have the impact that I wanted. The inside of the recess, around the edge, the thickness of the leather, I painted with black acrylic as well, so there was a bit of a contrast. The gold just didn't shine as I wanted it to. And what we looked at doing was using a black background, as you can see on there. Now, there were two possibilities. One was to use sprinkled gold, which is what I've ended up using. The other was to use sprinkled silver. A bit like a diamond, if you like. There was the idea. There was a fine line between getting that contrast and it clashing, and to me it just clashed a bit too much. Whereas with the gold on there, the colours seem to work really nicely. You got the black background, which means that you got a nice, it complemented the edge, the black edge to the recess nicely, and the black lines. And the gold still draws the eye, it still kind of sparkles a bit, but it also links in with the yellows and browns of the book.
Yeah.
But I'm pleased with it. So whether the judges will be remains to be seen.
Well,
we will find out.
See why people prepared to pay for them.
Yeah. Actually, when you understand it and you know the work that goes into them, the time involved, and the materials and so on, you start to recognise that it is a it is a piece of art that you're buying actually. And like any art, you might like it or you might not.
Yeah. As you say, it's subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So is there anything more that you want me to do for the video?
Edit it.
That might take a while. Hang on, where's my scissors?